The latest news lines around trade suggest that markets are really waiting to see whether we get a meeting confirmed between President Trump and President Xi. We've heard from the Chinese Foreign Ministry. They say they have no information to share on whether this is going to take place or not. So we'll wait for any confirmation of that. What difference could that make? Knowing a little about the relationship, perhaps, between the two, or witnessing it in the first term, what difference can it make when these two actually speak to each other?
Yeah, well, thanks so much for having me back on. And what I would say is the U.S.-China relationship with President Trump and President Xi at the helm is a very dramatic and mercurial relationship. But the way that this worked during Trump 1.0 is that sometimes you would see key negotiators and some of the key figures in the administration bring deals to their respective leaders, and then the leaders would have a call. But oftentimes it worked the opposite way, where it actually took a leader-level call to try to break through some of the ice. And so that's what you're seeing the White House tease right now, is the fact that we need a call between Trump and Xi to deal with some of these export control issues, the fact that China is still not making good on its Geneva agreement. China will have its set of requests and demands as well, including U.S. export control. So it's really teeing up an interesting conversation. But it is not unusual to have the leader-level call go first before progress.
Yes, so we'll see whether we get this call and whether we then see any progress delivered. What is your base case assumption then, Kellyanne, as to where we land on some kind of measure of trade tariffs into the United States? We've seen the legal challenges. I know you were on with the team last week talking about the various options, the various tools that the U.S. administration can still use to try and get its policies enacted. Are you managing to boil that down to a number, say, I don't know, low teens, mid-teens percentage tariff on U.S. imports? What's your expectation?
Yeah, and what's been interesting is if you watch the Sunday shows, you had multiple U.S. administration officials out there saying, look, there's this court case, but it actually won't matter. Either they say we're going to win the case, or even if we don't, we have an entire toolkit full of potential tariffs that we can use. So what I'm telling clients and what I'm advising is don't expect these tariff rates to change. The fact that we have this 10% across the board baseline tariff, the president has other tools he can use to impose that, and then potentially raising tariffs on trading partners who don't want to negotiate. He's got other tools to do that, too. So I don't really think that this changes the chessboard. What it does change is a bit of the timing as this litigation plays out.
So does that mean, then, we still get, what is it, 10% average tariff, 15? What's the ballpark?
Yeah, that's where we are right now. And the president has said that he can use 122, 301, 232, and other types of legal authorities to reimpose some of these same 10% tariffs.
But where we've seen, Kellyanne, this doubling of the steel and aluminium tariffs, does that make you think that the UK was a little premature in agreeing this trade pact with the president?
Well, I think where the UK is actually coming out probably better than any other trading partner right now is those steel and aluminum tariffs were part of that trade deal. So the U.S., although we didn't have much detail in terms of what was agreed, there was an agreement on steel and aluminum that certain UK products would be exempt, provided that they adopt similar measures as the U.S. And so the UK is actually in a much better position than other governments who don't have those commitments. Now, what I do think this means is that steel and aluminum are going to feature as a very prominent part of some of these other trade negotiations, like with the EU, Japan, Vietnam, and others who are currently negotiating.
Well, yeah, so when it comes to the EU deal, how quickly do you think that they can get that over the line? Or are there other lower-hanging fruit that you think will come first?
Yeah, I'm not optimistic, and I never have been, about a U.S.-EU trade deal, in part because some of the blocks that have existed in the past continue to exist about two entrenched regulatory systems that really don't see eye to eye on a number of issues. Now, that said, they're making a run at it, and the president is turning up the heat to try to get the EU to come to the table. But I think countries like India, Japan, and South Korea will be first before we see anything with the EU.
Yeah, so it might take some time to get there. I mean, what expectation is there, really, do you think, in Washington that Europe or any other jurisdiction changes its VAT regime as a result of a request from the Trump administration?
Yeah, well, so far we've seen very little interest from our trading partners in adjusting some of their taxation policies. But what's been interesting is that part of the big tax discussion happening in Washington is this concept of a revenge tax, the Section 899. And that is designed to get at the digital services taxes that a number of our trading partners continue to impose on U.S. tech companies. So that is looking like a potential pathway for the U.S. to go after some of these tax issues, but it doesn't look like the VAT is really going to be part of these negotiations. It could be that the administration has other tools that it plans to execute.
But Kellyanne, Valerie was just showing us how you've got long-end yields rising in the U.S. Are you not worried that if you have Section 899, it's going to drive away that foreign investment even more?
Yeah, that's certainly a concern, right? Because it has to do with whether or not companies and individuals are going to be investing in the U.S. There's also a question about treasuries, whether they're included. I think there are a lot of questions about this legislation. And what's not clear is whether the Senate takes it up as part of its big, beautiful tax bill as well. So we don't actually know if this is going to become law. But it is certainly a messaging tool that the administration is using to try to say, look, we haven't forgotten about digital services taxes, and we have some tools there.
Yes, I mean, and the digital services tax suggestion from the United States is that these taxes are extraterritorial. But then a lot of what we're hearing in terms of policy coming out of the White House would seem extraterritorial. I mean, from sanctions regimes around Russia to some of what we're talking about here with 899 of the big, beautiful bill. Does this just need a whole new reset across the Atlantic? It seems that there are just so many areas of disagreement and a lack of consensus.
There are certainly no shortage of challenges in terms of this economic relationship. What I would say is the view from the United States on a relatively bipartisan basis for the last 20 years has been that our trading relationships are asymmetric, that the deal that was cut back in the 90s just doesn't work and it's not fair in terms of today's economy. That's going to take updates and changes. Now, where the line is in terms of is the U.S. Being too aggressive in terms of responding to some of these asymmetries, I think that's for the two trading partners to work out. But clearly there's going to be some changes if the president's going to land something that is more equivalent.
Yeah, I mean, there would have been a choice to another U.S. administration could perhaps have teamed up with allies and said, let's try and reinvent the global trading system so it suits all of us a little better because it's maybe skewed too much in China's favour. But that's not an approach that the Trump administration felt it wanted to take.
Well, what I would say is I spent 10 years as a U.S. negotiator working for different administrations, and other administrations have tried to use more traditional forms of diplomacy and negotiation, and it just hasn't worked. And even in Trump 1.0, you had this trilateral deal between the EU, Japan, and the U.S. to try to get at some of China's unfair trade practices. It took 2 years to negotiate, and they couldn't even agree on a common definition of subsidies. It's not a particularly effective way to reorder the global trading system. Now, is Trump's? We'll have to see. But certainly traditional methods just don't work.
And given that you know Trump's mind so well, you can settle something for us. Does Trump always chicken out?
Well, I think he would take a great issue with that characterization.
He didn't like it.
Nasty, he said.
Yeah, but I mean, here's the thing, too, right? Like, if this idea of chickening out means that we have 30% tariffs across the board on all Chinese imports and 10% on everything else, I'm not sure I would describe that as chickening out. That is a de-acceleration from a trade embargo, which was just unsustainable.